Coming up next, it's a special edition of Live from My Office, celebrating President's Day. And a lot of news. This is sponsored by the Rouse Center for the Performing Arts, one of my favorite places to perform myself. Many of you know the majority of our New Year's Eve shows have been at the Rouse Center. We will be back for New Year's Eve in 2023. And there's a special Father's Day show coming up, which you'll be hearing more about here and on the radio at WLS each morning that I'm on. The Rouse Center is a fabulous place, and I highly recommend you go to RaueCenter.org, RaueCenter.org. The staff is fabulous. The theater is immaculate. The acoustics are great, and we just love performing there. Whether it's Lucy's Comedy, where you're live on stage with the comedian, sitting in comfortable bleachers while they perform. They essentially turn the theater around. It's a fun night. Or all the great music events that are coming up. They also have their school, if you will, a performing arts school. All this is on the website. You go there and check it out. This is just an opportunity for me to say thank you to the Rouse Center, and thank you to you for supporting us whenever we're there. Go to RaueCenter.org. Even if you're nowhere near Crystal Lake, Illinois, do yourself a favor and enjoy a night out or all the other things they offer. RaueCenter.org, RaueCenter.org. This is a special edition of Live from My Office. I'm Steve Cochran. Thank you very much for being here. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen. And tell your friends to make sure they never miss an episode of Live from My Office. Got a lot of good stuff coming up, too. Wow. This is President's Day, and as I'm recording this, President Biden has just done a surprise visit to Kyiv and President Zelensky in Ukraine. Gotta say, didn't see that coming. And the Russians didn't either, apparently, until the very last minute. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the idea that a president would fly into an active war zone, I mean, that's a Secret Service nightmare. He pledged more millions in aid. They had further discussions, he and Zelensky, about where they were and where they were going. I mentioned Russia was told, look, here's the way this generally works. You would tell the greatest threat, the greatest enemy to you that this was happening, and not until the last minute, because you want to make sure they understand the message. If anything were to happen to the president while he is in Ukraine, regardless of the fact that this is a war zone, you will be considered at war with the United States of America. It's a bad day to be Putin, like so many bad days have been. And it's a great day for Ukraine. It shows great support for Ukraine. It's also a very difficult day for anybody that's wanted to slam our support for Ukraine to go after Biden. So is he setting the stage for 2024? Is he doing the right thing? Or is he recognizing the one-year anniversary of this pointless war with a show of strength and support from the United States, far and away Ukraine's greatest ally? By the way, don't forget that Ukraine and the Ukraine story has meant a lot to Biden throughout, while he was vice president and certainly now as president. And it's meant a lot to the far right, too, taking shots at him and try to tie him to corruption of the previous governments there. And, of course, Trump's beautiful phone call. It's all there. It's all news. But I salute President Biden for a heroic, crazy trip to Ukraine. Man, you have to take your hat off if you have one. If you don't have a hat, go get one. Put it on now so you can take it off. Take your hat off to the Secret Service agents and those that protect the First Family and our leaders. Because it's just, you'll never know their names. And it's just an unbelievable thing that Biden and company just pulled off. So we move on. Of course, the other thing on everyone's mind today, this would be news, not just of the President's Day nature, but news because over the weekend we found out that former President Jimmy Carter has made a choice to live out his final days at home. His cancer has spread again. He is 98 years old. He has lived an amazing life. And the statement from the Carter Center read, after a series of short hospital stays, Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter today decided to spend his remaining time at home with his family and receive hospice care instead of additional medical intervention. He has the full support of his family and his medical team. The Carter family asked for privacy during this time and is grateful for the concern shown by his many admirers. And by the way, count me amongst them. His presidency was not a success. As a matter of fact, it was, by many accounts, a massive failure. Democrats in Congress didn't support him. It said that he micromanaged way too much and then didn't have a clear idea of what some of his policies were. Terrible economy. That's no more his fault than anybody else that inherits a terrible economy. But he didn't do enough to fix it. And the buck stops on the president's desk even when we're short on bucks. He also had the energy crisis, the Iran hostage crisis. But there were a lot of good things that Jimmy Carter did as well. The Camp David Accords, where he got Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat together, created the Department of Education, and actually appointed more women and minorities than any president ever had before. His commitment to human rights and peace marked what is unquestionably the greatest second act of any president. You think about what he did in the last 43 years, it's nothing short of remarkable. He's written over 30 books. He's been a regular professor at Emory University. He's been a regular Sunday school teacher at church. He is a devout man and always has been. The Habitat for Humanity thing, people think he started it. He didn't actually start it, but without his support, it wouldn't have become the juggernaut of a charity for the poor to make sure there are homes being built, and there are right now everywhere in the country, thanks to Jimmy Carter. And the Carter Center for Human Rights, for which he won a Nobel Peace Prize, is really an amazing organization. I'm going to remind you at the end of this, when we highlight a charitable organization, it's a great place to make a donation as a legacy to Jimmy Carter in this life and beyond. So I salute President Carter and the great life he lived and the amazing thing he did after that presidency. I mean, there is no comparison. I had the great honor of interviewing him on many occasions, and each time I found him to be exactly who I hoped he would be. He was charming and delightful and incredibly kind. Stubborn. At one point, I found me in disagreeing with his policies in a couple of areas, and I had to check my own ego and think, I'm arguing with the President of the United States. Back it down, Steve. But he never challenged me. I know because I was there. You don't know. He wasn't that kind of guy and isn't that kind of guy. It was just a pleasure to have an opportunity to spend some time with him, and I think about him often. Not for the least of reasons, and that he was very kind to my daughter when she was there, and at one point said, as you know, Steve, I have a daughter named Amy, and I love her very much, and I love your daughter after spending time with her. At that point, I would have walked in front of a bus for him. So we pray for his comfort and for his family, and I think I speak for a lot of you in just saying we thank Jimmy Carter for the full life he led and for the service that he put forward. As a matter of fact, speaking of that, there's a great quote from Carter that says, I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have to try to make a difference. It's beyond moving. Thank you, President Jimmy Carter, for all you have done in this life. Rest easy, and your medical team will take it from here. In the meantime, I thought on this President's Day, before all this news broke, and we're sticking with the plan mostly, that on this special edition of Live from My Office, I would bring you some facts, some things you may not be aware of when it comes to presidents from the past. And by that, I mean all of them. All of them. All of the presidents, all 46 of them. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Steve, you don't have that kind of time. Well, as it turns out, I do. So why don't we start with President number 1, George Washington, right after I make an attempt to explain President's Day, if I can. President's Day is a federal holiday. It's celebrated on the third Monday in February. And originally it was established a long time ago. My recollection was that, and maybe it was yours as well, that, well, when I was a kid in the 70s, we had Washington's birthday, we had Lincoln's birthday, and it seemed to me that we should probably celebrate those two, maybe throw in an FDR separately, but they were all combined into one holiday. And now it feels like they're all there for mattress sales, and if we ever get cars on car lots again, car sales. No. It's a time to reflect on the most ridiculously difficult job there is, and our continued amazement that people still want to do it. So President's Day was sanctified, if you will, in the early 70s to become this unified holiday to celebrate presidents, and it's a government holiday. Lots of businesses are off today. Again, we're recording this on President's Day. So there's a little background. Of course, the President of the United States has been celebrated in movies and held up in movies and TV shows again and again and again. The documentary type take, the David Frost, Richard Nixon interviews, the Frost-Nixon movie was fascinating. The drama of being the president played out for the Watergate era and all the president's men, and maybe a combination of a documentary and drama feel, and an amazing movie called 13 Days, which if you've never seen, it's about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I'd highly recommend it. Of course, everybody thinks about the West Wing and President Bartlett. Maybe far too left side for you, but very entertaining television for what, 7, 8, 9 seasons? I lose track how many seasons he had. The American president, for those of you who wanted romance in the White House, remember Michael Douglas and Annette Bening? And then, of course, there was Lincoln, Steven Spielberg's epic, where Abraham Lincoln was portrayed trying to get the amendment passed to end slavery. I will stop and watch this movie for a minute, for 30 minutes, or I'll rewatch it again. I couldn't begin to tell you how many times I've seen it. And I always remember this scene.
Here today,
state by state, you can extra.
I can't listen to this anymore. I can't accomplish a goddamn thing of any human meaning or worth until we cure ourselves of slavery and end this pestilential war. And whether any of you or anyone else knows it, I know I need this. This amendment is that cure. We are stepped out upon the world stage now, with the fate of human dignity in our hands. Blood's been spilt to afford us this moment, now. And you grousel and heckle and dodge about like pettifogging Tammany Hall hucksters. See what is before you. See the here and now. That's the hardest thing, the only thing that accounts. Abolishing slavery by constitutional provision settles the fate for all coming time, not only of the millions now in bondage, but of unborn millions to come. 2 votes stand in its way. These votes must be procured.
We need 2 yeses, 3 abstentions, or 4 yeses and 1 more abstention, and the amendment will pass.
You got a night and a day and a night, several perfectly good hours. Now get the hell out of here and get them.
Yes. But how?
Buzzard's guts, man. I am the President of the United States of America, clothed in immense power. You will procure me these votes.
That, of course, is the amazing Daniel Day-Lewis. I think Daniel Day-Lewis captured Lincoln much better than any other portrayal I've ever seen of Lincoln. Of course, I never met him, never heard him speak, but don't you think Daniel Day-Lewis thinks he is Lincoln? I mean, that's kind of what makes him great. But it wasn't just that great acting that portrayed the presidency. Oh, no. There's been great acting everywhere for all these years.
Second one. What president of the United States wore the biggest hat? It's easy, Batman. The one with the biggest head.
Of course.
That's right. Bruce Wayne and his boy wonder, Robin. All right, maybe they're not Daniel Day-Lewis, but, you get the idea. So let's jump in to some facts you probably didn't know, because I certainly didn't know many of these, and I'm a nerd for this stuff. Starting with our first president, the father of our country, George Washington. As I said, my personal belief is the man deserves to continue to have his own day. But here's a couple things I found out. Did you know Washington grew cannabis on his huge, huge farm? It was to grow hemp to make rope. Yeah, of course it was. And one of George Washington's friends, a physician named Dr. William Thornton, wanted to try to bring him back to life. He died of acute epiglottitis, a bacterial throat infection in 1799. The doctor was summoned to treat him. And it's tough when you go and you see your friend has passed and you're a doctor and you think you can help. He proposed that they take Washington's then dead body and, quote, thaw him in cold water and then produce an artificial respiration via an opening, a tracheotomy, if you will. And that could bring him back to life. The doctor was taken out of the room at that point and told not to talk anymore. President number 2 was John Adams. I love this fact. Many of you know, of course, that his last words were wrong. He didn't know that 50 years to the day after he and Thomas Jefferson had signed the Declaration of Independence, both gone on to be presidents, had tremendous rivalries, had a falling out, and eventually got back together. He said on his deathbed, Jefferson still survives. Yeah, not so much. Within hours, Thomas Jefferson would be dead as well on July 4th. I mean, really, a remarkable story. So John Adams' other amazing fact that I was able to find for you is this. When the Adams family, not that one, the presidential one, moved into the White House, they didn't know how to get there. They didn't. And there weren't highways. There were barely roads in some areas. And John Adams and his family wandered in the woods for hours before finally finding the White House. President number 3 was Thomas Jefferson. It's said that he kept grizzly bears at the house. Now, I never knew that Thomas Jefferson was an outdoorsman, but at one point, apparently, that was a well-known thing because while he was an ambassador in France, he asked John Sullivan, the governor of New Hampshire, to send him a dead moose, along with a dead caribou and a dead elk, because he wanted to prove a point in an argument he had with some Frenchmen. Hey, kids, there was no internet then. President number 4 was James Madison, the smallest president of all time. 5 feet 4 inches tall, said to barely weigh 100 pounds. Madison was so sure that the army that he, of course, was the head of would win its battle against the British that he ordered a fabulous dinner to be prepared. Whoops. Dolly got the dinner ready along with the staff, and then they had to evacuate the White House and run because the British not only found the victory feast after they won the battle, they came to the White House and burned it down. That's right, the White House was flipped. It's a rehab, kids. President number 5 is James Monroe, and he makes a cameo in a painting, a very famous painting, of a different U.S. president. He's in the shadow of George Washington. He's the soldier holding the flag as they were crossing the Delaware in 1776 when he was just 18 years old. It's not an entirely accurate painting, but yes, he was there. John Quincy Adams is number 6. He thought that the earth was hollow, and no, I'm not making that up. He was a hollow earther and once tried to propose government funds be used for an expedition down that hollow hole that he thought existed. Of course, we know now that the Earth's center core is actually delicious nougat, and the only one ever to go through a hole to the other side of the Earth was the great scientist Bugs Bunny. Quincy Adams, by the way, also famous, and you may know this, he loved a skinny dip. Not that unusual for that timing, but yeah, every morning he'd take it all off and jump in the river and take himself a bath. President number 7, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, a famous warrior and a famous troublemaker and rabble-rouser. What was he very proud of in the White House? A giant block of cheese. The cheese was donated by some farmers in New York, got the idea from a gift Thomas Jefferson once got. Jefferson could not compare, however, to Jackson's, quote, awe-inspiring 1,600-pound cheese wheel from Western Massachusetts. Ah, yes, and there's nothing quite like year-old cheese left out in the White House. President number 8, Martin Van Buren. If you've never seen a picture of Martin Van Buren, I encourage you to Google it. That's quite a head of hair. Martin Van Buren's wife, Hannah, died of tuberculosis 18 years before he became president, and yet he didn't mention her a single time in his 800-page published autobiography. It seems that he couldn't talk about her at any point after she passed without breaking down. It's kind of sweet. William Henry Harrison. He was president number 9. He campaigned for president using a huge ball covered with campaign slogans, and it was all under the premise of, did you have fun during your campaign? Oh, yes, I had a ball. Get it? Years later, and this is how the phrase keep the ball rolling came about, Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd president and one of the 25 grandchildren of President William Henry Harrison, later repeated the stunt in his 1888 presidential campaign. It even got a reference on Parks and Recreation. Yeah, it's William Henry Harrison and his wacky grandson, Benjamin. Number 10, John Tyler, born in 1790, had a grandson that lived to 1922. How's that possible? Get really old, have your plumbing still work. But as of November of 2020, Harrison Ruffin Tyler was just 91 and living in a nursing home. And in September that year, his brother, Lion Gardner Tyler Jr., had died at the age of 95. Some kind of genes in that family. And apparently they didn't keep him on that much because they had a lot of offspring. President number 11, James K. Polk. He was operated on without anesthesia when he was just a teenager. I don't think that was probably a good development. He was a sickly child. He suffered from constant, quote, urinary stones. These stones were removed in a surgery performed before modern antiseptics and anesthesia. And you know where urinary stones are? And he didn't have any anesthesia. They say he drank some brandy to dull his senses. My hope is he drank all the brandy. Zachary Taylor was president number 12 and the first president to popularize the term First Lady. President number 13 was Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore was considered the hottest president ever up until the time of JFK. The ladies loved Millard. President number 14, Franklin Pierce. He refused to take the oath of office on the Bible. Immediately following the election, Pierce's 11-year-old son, Benny, was killed in a freak train accident when some wood had fallen and struck him on the head. Now, using the Bible isn't required to take the oath, but he believed his son's death to be God's judgment for his political campaigning, so he wouldn't touch the Bible. President number 15, James Buchanan. Buchanan once had the Prince of Wales and a giant entourage stay at the White House. Seems that there was really no Airbnb options at that point. And nobody really knew how many people the Prince of Wales were bringing. Turns out, brought quite a few. Buchanan, the President of the United States, had to sleep on a makeshift cot in the hallway. President number 16, of course, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, maybe the most consequential president of all time. If you go with the theory that George Washington founded the country, that Abraham Lincoln saved the country, and that FDR kept the country going, that's pretty much why they all are considered the 3 greatest presidents of all time. One thing you may not know about President Lincoln, he's in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. No, I'm not making that up. President number 17 was an absolute disaster. Andrew Johnson. He showed up completely sideways, wasted to Lincoln's second inauguration when he was sworn in as vice president. Loved whiskey, completely blew up Reconstruction after Lincoln's assassination. and set the course of civil rights back possibly as much as 100 years. President number 18, possibly one of the most underrated presidents of all time, and that's Ulysses S. Grant. There's a great History Channel documentary series on Grant. There's many, but I'd highly recommend it. Grant wasn't just a Civil War hero. He was a president who didn't keep close enough watch on those he trusted. There was some conspiracies that made things even worse. But Grant did a number of things as president, far too numerous to mention here, that are worthy of the fact that he was considered a hero in his time and then largely forgotten since then, partly because his accomplishments were diminished by the South and by those trying to revive the South and revive slavery, who hated Grant because of what Grant did to the South and winning a war. But he's worthy of a little bit of Google research if you're into it. President Ulysses S. Grant. President 19, Rutherford B. Hayes. Not a huge American president, but a hero in Paraguay. Hayes sided with Paraguay in a land dispute against Argentina. He is a giant there, an immortal figure still, in case you're swinging by Paraguay anytime soon. President 20, James Garfield, shot in 1881. His condition worsened because doctors made repeated probes with unsterilized fingers and instruments to find the bullet, created an infection which otherwise wasn't there, and in the process, killed him. President number 21. Well, it's a little difficult to describe President number 21. He's the only Chester on the list. Chester A. Arthur. And Chester A. Arthur was another president from that period of time that wasn't necessarily an accomplished fella. There was a 24-year-old black schoolteacher named Elizabeth Jennings who refused to get off a segregated horse-drawn streetcar. She was late to church where she played the organ, and she told the conductor, "I'm a respectable person born in New York," and that he was a good-for-nothing fellow insulting decent persons while on their way to church. Meanwhile, when a police officer removed Jennings, she went public with her story and wrote a letter about it later. That person that was rude to her got into the fight of his life with a lawyer named Chester A. Arthur, who defended her and won the case long before anybody knew Rosa Parks' name. President number 22, Grover Cleveland, was unmarried when he became president, so his sister Rose acted as the first lady until he married, and he later married a 21-year-old ward, if you will, may or may not have been related to him. He was known for personally answering incoming calls to the White House. Now, Rutherford B. Hayes had the first phone installed in the White House in 1877. Alexander Graham Bell, in 1876, invented the phone. A year later, Grover Cleveland was serving as White House receptionist. And his sister may have been the first gay first lady. That's right, that's the relation tie I mentioned before. Number 23, Benjamin Harrison. Didn't tell anyone whether he liked South Dakota or North Dakota better. He made them both states, but he would never reveal which came first. He thought that was important at the time. Grover Cleveland came in again at 24, the only president elected in non-consecutive terms. President 25, William McKinley. Not all presidential surgeries are a success. At the Pan American Exposition, he was shot by an anarchist, and the bullet entered his stomach. A second bullet hit a coat button and bounced off. People heard McKinley tell the furious crowd, "Go easy on him," on the shooter. He was operated on by the only doctor, a gynecologist, who lacked the right surgical instruments to perform the surgery. It seems that, again, medical knowledge of the day made things worse, and he soon would die. Teddy Roosevelt would become president then, president number 26. Teddy Roosevelt named the White House the White House. Prior to Teddy Roosevelt, it was called the Executive Mansion or the Presidential Palace. And as tough as Teddy Roosevelt was, he was mostly worried about what his daughter Alice was up to. Alice Lee was, quote, a headline maker, a risk taker, a hellraiser, and a trendsetter. She became a national celebrity, and her popularity resulted in all sorts of problems for Teddy. He's famous for a quote that said, I can do one of two things. I can either be president of the United States or I can control my daughter Alice, but I cannot possibly do both. President number 27 was William Howard Taft. Taft at 27 was the heaviest U.S. president, 340 pounds. There's no truth to the rumor that he once got stuck in a White House bathtub, but it's absolutely true that when he would travel with a custom bathtub made to his size so he could stay clean, and it would go with him. This is obviously before flying became a regular part of the president's mode of transportation, so you can imagine how much fun it must have been. And a dark note, a gun stolen once from William Howard Taft was used in at least 10 murders by a serial killer. We continue with our President's Day revealing of facts you likely didn't know. Woodrow Wilson raised sheep. He was number 28. He raised sheep on the White House lawn. See? You didn't know that. Wilson's wedding ceremony was catered by Chef Boyardee. What you talking about, Steve? The chef's real name was Hector Boiardi, an Italian immigrant, but Hector Boiardi's family and associates eventually would start a company called Chef Boyardee. No word on whether they had SpaghettiOs, but when I was a little kid, it was one of my favorite. President number 29, Warren G. Harding, had the biggest presidential feat. Size 14 shoes, wasn't all that interested in being president, way more interested in having a good time. He lost the White House china in a poker game, and he nicknamed his penis. He was known for chasing the ladies, and his nickname for his penis was Jerry. Nope. Once again, not making it up. President number 30, Calvin Coolidge, had a pet raccoon named Rebecca. And those pet raccoons were being bothered by squirrels in the White House lawn. He ordered the Secret Service to kill the squirrels. They, of course, had to make the point that we can't be firing guns on the White House lawn, sir. President number 31, Herbert Hoover was a rich guy, possibly a racist. He is wrongfully blamed for causing the Depression, but rightfully blamed for not figuring out a way out of it. Without Herbert Hoover, you may not have Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There's a reason things happen. But Hoover had a rule that the staff couldn't look at him. And if anybody looked at him, they would be in trouble. The staff then actively hid from Hoover, including jumping into the bushes if they needed to. President number 32, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, famous for a million reasons, 4 times elected, had polio, and the effects of which made him progressively weaker, would eventually end his life. But without Roosevelt, you wouldn't have many of the programs we have today. He was able to steer the country out of the Depression, wrongfully credited with doing that with his New Deal plan. It wasn't that. It was a series of things, but made a lot of strong decisions, and of course was in the White House when the Japanese dropped the bombs on Pearl Harbor. The war was a very eventful time, obviously, and Roosevelt, disturbingly at one point, with all the other decisions he had to make, he once saw Winston Churchill naked. It seems that they were both fighting together to get things done to save the world. And they had Churchill and Roosevelt together at an event that went longer than expected. There were a couple of days. They were sharing a locker room of sorts. And Churchill was naked, and little Winston was there for everyone to see. President number 33, Harry Truman. Harry Truman, of course, dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, essentially ending the war in the Pacific. But he doesn't get credit for this. He hated Dumbo. He wouldn't get on the Dumbo ride when he visited Disneyland in 1957 after he had left the White House because as a Democrat, he didn't want to be photographed smiling around an elephant, the symbol of the Republican Party. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president number 34. He's the guy who prepared a victory feast for a war he hadn't won yet. No, that's someone else, isn't it? That was the War of 1812. Eisenhower was a military leader to the end. And in fact, he wrote out 2 speeches and asked all of his men to do the same. In the event that D-Day failed, he wanted all of the blame to be placed on him. and wrote a letter of the same. It's available to be seen in full text now wherever you get historical information. Again, it's a simple Google away. But Eisenhower was an amazing war leader, if not a questionable president at times, but did serve 2 full terms after serving his country. President number 35 is John F. Kennedy. His story is well known, as many of these modern presidents are. But somebody lost JFK's brain. Following JFK's autopsy, the brain was stored in the National Archives, which apparently has a brain section. But in 1966, somebody noticed the brain was gone. Of course, Kennedy's brain was important to future generations of scientists to figure out what happened. Conspiracy theorists said the brain is missing, and that JFK's brother Robert took it to conceal evidence of the true extent of Kennedy's illnesses, or perhaps conceal evidence of the number of medications he was taking. Other conspiracy theorists said stealing the brain helped conceal the fact that the gunshots could not have come just from Lee Harvey Oswald. President number 36, LBJ, a very consequential president. Again, not given proper credit for all the good he did because the bad of keeping us in Vietnam outweighed it. He had a vehicle, a water vehicle, an amphicar, if you will, and he loved to take people that were on his Texas ranch in that car, go as fast as he could, pretend the brakes would go out, drive directly into the pond on his property, and pretend they were going to drown until he hit another switch and the car would start floating. Why don't we have those cars now? I mean, come on. They sound like they're going to be fun. President number 37, Richard Nixon. What do I tell you about Nixon that you don't already know? How about this? He once decided he really didn't like the uniforms his staff wore at the White House, so he decided to jazz them up. They were gold. They had ceremonial ties on them, fancy buttons and buckles, sort of a Banana Republic dictator look. Nixon gave up when everybody hated the robes. They were then given to a local high school marching band in Washington. That seems appropriate. President number 38, Gerald Ford, famously had 2 assassination attempts within 17 days of each other from 2 crazy ladies, neither of which knew each other, one of which was tied to Charles Manson. Good God, the man was only in the White House for 2 years. He wasn't elected, and he almost died. He also had previous jobs as a Yellowstone park ranger and as a fashion model because, yeah, Jerry Ford was quite the looker when he was a young man at Michigan. And he was also one of the key people as a young congressman on the Warren Commission, going back to the Kennedy investigation. President number 39 is Jimmy Carter. We've talked about Carter a great deal already. A couple of facts you may not know. He truly believed he saw a UFO in 1969, wanted to release every piece of information about UFOs that the government had to the public. After he became president, he found out that would not be a good idea, as the information had some troubling things in it. To this day, we still don't have the full knowledge of what he saw or what he may have known. Carter also was famous for a Playboy magazine interview in which he said he had lusted in his heart. Remember when that was scandalous? You remember when his brother Billy was scandalous because he liked beer and was a redneck? Oh, how times change. Speaking of UFOs and stuff, Ronald Reagan. Again, it's hard to come up with facts for these most modern presidents, but Ronald Reagan made a deal with Mikhail Gorbachev that if the U.S. were invaded by aliens, or if the Soviet Union were invaded by aliens, they would drop the Cold War pretenses and protect each other. That's right. President number 41, George H.W. Bush, was distant cousins with Hugh Hefner and John Kerry. How about that? He also hated broccoli so much. He said, I hated it when I was a little kid. My mother made me eat it. I'm president of the United States. I'm not going to eat any more broccoli. Broccoli farmers protested, and they sent him 20,000 pounds of broccoli. It was promptly donated to local homeless shelters. President number 42, Bill Clinton. Oh, yes, Bill Clinton. You know, he only sent 2 emails while he was president. Neither one was to Monica. Anything else about Clinton? You know, feel free to look it up. He was one of the smartest guys to ever see the White House, to ever sit in the White House, but because of his personal issues, he'll always be remembered more for the guy and the lies he told It's a shame because he could have been well remembered as a great president. President number 43, George W. Bush, I believe should be remembered better than he has been. He made decisions that were made in the time with Democrats' approval. And as I always say, you can't have it both ways. It goes to Biden now and the Republicans. But back then, the Democrats wanted you to know that they believed that Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld started a war for specific purposes to meet their agenda in getting rid of Saddam Hussein and warring with Iraq. And I would change the balance of the Middle East. For those of you old enough to remember, post 9/11, through those early days in 2004 and 5 or even 2003, the Democrats were on board. You can't have it both ways. You can't say George W. Bush was a complete moron and an evil leader. He's one or the other. President number 44, Barack Obama, was once insured against crocodile attacks. In a 2011 visit to Australia's Northern Territory, the Chief Minister, Paul Henderson, gave him a policy that would have paid out $50,000 Australian to his wife, Michelle, if he was attacked by a crocodile, in one of the more unique gifts that you would ever see. President number 45 was Donald Trump. And the airlines didn't work. Trump the game didn't work. Trump steaks didn't work. Trump went bankrupt a lot. But he ultimately did get work when he was made the President of the United States. Even now it sounds funny, and it still makes you scratch your head. Everything Donald Trump did wasn't bad. Donald Trump got credit for, and rightfully so, making some decisions. Might not have been his idea, but he made decisions as the President of the United States that were beneficial to the country. But so much was so bad, and he took the lid off stupid in this country, leading, of course, to January 6th. And we are still trying to recover from all of that. And finally, President number 46. When a teacher mocked a young Joe Biden over his stutter, his mother took no prisoners. Biden is actively talked about his stutter and tried to help kids who stuttered as well. A nun made fun of him and in front of the class would say, Mr. Biden, it's your turn. Mom got a hold of that, told the nun, if you ever speak to my son like that again, I'll come back and rip that bonnet off your head. Maybe Joe wasn't wrong when he talks about all those times his dad went and get in a fist fight when he got laid off out behind a garage. And as the great Dana Carvey says, no joke. Of course it's not a joke. Look, that's a sweep, if you will, of all 46 presidents and the stuff you didn't know about them. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you will look at the Carter Center website, cartercenter.org, and consider making a donation at the Carter Center because it's a great way to remember Jimmy Carter. At the time of this recording, he is in hospice care. We're still hoping for a miracle. But at 98, he's made a decision to live out what he believes will be his final days with his family, and God bless him for it. And I thought we'd close this episode in two ways. I want to thank my son, Ross Cochran, for all the great work he does in producing this. Thank you, Ross. I want to thank you for listening. So I guess it's actually three ways. Because the third way is to leave the final words of this edition of Live from My Office to Jimmy Carter. They mattered when he said them, they mattered when he repeated them, and they certainly matter today. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Jimmy Carter.
America did not invent human rights. In a very real sense, it's the other way around. Human rights invented America.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Visit CochranShow.com for more.